We kick off this episode with Dr. Saul Grissom watching TV, dozing on the couch, but he's awakened by a case of his place is on fire. And that's pretty unfortunate for him because it seems that the whole apartment has been soaked in gasoline and all he has is a fire extinguisher with the capacity of the average human bladder. The fire department rushes to the scene past the smiling Tony Todd, which, is always a bad sign because Tony Todd is rarely around when there is good news to tell. If he ever says, "Congratulations, it's twins," you're pregnant with devil dogs or something. They bust into the apartment of Dr. Flammable, only to discover that it's a false alarm. Yet the doctor is dead next to an empty fire extinguisher. Well, the plot fairy drops off a copy of the story circled in the paper, along with a copy of the 911 tape for Muldar. He shows it to Skinner and asks if he can have the keys because he really wants to do his investigation and he ate his green beans for supper and everything. Can I just do it, Mr. Skinner? So Skinner says he'll think about it, but Muldar has to go off and get to work typing up transcripts of wiretaps. Yep, it's gone from the X-Files to just filing. Still, if the news of the past week has taught us anything, it's that the government wants to have that stuff down there. They want to know everything, from how often I order Chinese food to how often I download erotic pictures of Talizora. Kidding, of course. I hate Chinese food. Mulder's saved from office hell by the arrival of this guy, Krychek, who was actually already on this case and so is being partnered up with Muldar. Krychek's already started looking into things.
You already talked to the police?
Yep. Just hung up on the officer in charge a few minutes ago. Detective named Horton.
Yeah, I know him. He submitted an X-file when he thought he heard a who. Muldar doesn't want to work with Krychek, but if it's not this, then he'll have to report to the set of Mad Men. So he insists that if Muldar wants to investigate, they're going to have to be partners in this. So, shackled with Agent Brillcream, Muldar takes some time to ask Scully to do an autopsy on Grissom, then visits the sleep clinic where he worked. He was a giant in the field of sleep disorders, and we see they're even trying to help this man's nightmares by changing his dreams using electric stimulation, because that's more scientific than other stimulation and cheaper on an hourly basis. Krychek finds Muldar outside and is understandably pissed off that he was ditched, but he fails to register on Mulder's give-a-shit. More effective is Krychek's remark that he was one of a small number of people at the Academy who believed in what Muldar was doing and wants to get to the truth too. So when Scully calls and says, "Come here and look inside the dead guy," Muldar agrees to let Krychek tag along. It seems that while Grissom has no burns or anything that shows he was in a fire, he has all the symptoms that shows that he was in a fire.
I can't even begin to explain what could have caused something like this. I mean, it's almost as if...
What?
As if his body believed that it was burning.
So are you saying that he had the power inside him to burn to death at any time, but he needed to find it for himself? Elsewhere, enjoying a late night of people hawking shit on TV is Henry. Note the weird scar he's got on the back of his neck. He gets a visit from Tony Todd as preacher. Their happy reunion is sullied, though, by discussion of some incident that Henry gets more and more upset over, and it's not helped when preacher admits that he killed Grissom. Next thing we know, there's this audience of mutilated people watching. They pull out machine guns and then just mow Henry down. But, this is Brooklyn, so nobody really notices. Muldar and Krychek get word. Seems the guy died from all the signs of gunshot wounds except gunshot wounds. They're also curious about the surgical scar and wonder if it's connected to Nam. They do discover that Grissom and Henry were both at Paris Island 24 years ago. So the groundwork has now been laid. The only other member of Henry's squad that's still alive is Preacher, who's locked up in a psychiatric ward. Or he was until the doctor released him 2 days ago, despite having no memory of doing so, or, not thinking that it was a horrible, horrible idea. With the lead now lost, it's time for another phone call from the plot fairy. The voice from the host, well, he wants to meet in person now, but alone. He's X, and he's here with information about a top-secret project that was concerned that sleep is a problem for soldiers. So they devised a way to eliminate the need for sleep altogether. Preacher has not slept in 24 years, which kind of reminds me of my last apartment. This is probably why the story is set in New York, right? It's the city that never sleeps, but But the subject finally turns to X. Who is he? I mean, obviously that's not his real name. It'd be ridiculous to have some kind of guy covering up alien conspiracies whose name is just a letter of the alphabet, right? From the sound of things, Deep Throat was probably a mentor for him, and X has come to believe in the cause as well, but Deep Throat's execution has made X kind of cautious. He's helping Muldar, but only on his terms. He doesn't want to wind up dead too. X is not the same as Deep Throat, though. He had tried to present a more cryptic guide to a world that Mulder had suspicions about, and who may have been using him as an element in his own game and all of that. X seems to be viewing Mulder and the X-Files as sort of a solution to a problem he doesn't want to have to handle directly, but thinks needs to be dealt with. His involvement is only to try to get Mulder running again so that he can deal with all this crap and X doesn't have to get involved anymore. Mulder hooks back up with Krychek just in time for the cops to circle in on Preacher, who robbed a drugstore but strangely enough only took some pills. And the real crazy part is that when the cops burst in, two of them just shoot each other and Preacher gets away. There's got to be a problem there. I mean, even Imperial stormtroopers manage not to do that most of the time. Well, looks like this is going to call for the Scully Science of the Week justification report. Grissom snipped part of the brain, and without that, the guys are staying awake, handling it thanks to a treatment that handles all the side effects of not sleeping, because your body just doesn't go to sleep to give you a chance to imagine that you're traveling over the pyramids in a flying waffle without your pants on. It's doing all kinds of stuff. Hell, this episode came out almost 20 years ago, and we still don't know all the purposes of sleep. Mulder, of course, has to take that into the realm of silly. Preacher can now use his decades of sleep deprivation, which can cause hallucinations, to be a sort of projected mind power of causing hallucinations in others. Well, that's just kind of the X-Files territory, isn't it? You just have to kind of go with that. They like to take a scientific fact and then add things onto that in a sort of a chain, if you will, until you get to something, and then you reel it all back in to connect the front with the back. For instance, they'll say, milk comes from breasts. Milk makes yogurt. Yogurt has bacteria in it. Some bacteria is bad. Ergo, you have a government conspiracy in your episode to create female undercover agents who can spray anthrax from their boobs. And no one would have suspected a thing, Scully. With good reason. And then he would make a body to die for joke while pulling out his cinderblock phone. Mulder stops in at this diner to check out someone else who had been part of that group but wasn't listed in the records. His name was in the info that X had given to Mulder. Salvatore sure as hell looks like a man who has never slept. Or eaten, for that matter. In fact, if I felt for a pulse, I'd have to pull up a chair and wait for a little while. He talks about their time in the squad. It started out great, not getting tired and being able to constantly patrol if they wanted to. But with their lack of sleep brought increased aggression, they eventually went AWOL and started just doing their own thing, killing their way across Nam like the world's bloodiest road trip. He mentions that there was another doctor on the project, Girardi, so we now have another lead to go on. Mulder figures that, with it having been the 24th anniversary of a slaughter so bloody that it even included 300 children, well, Preacher is probably punishing everybody that was connected with it, even the guys who gave the ability to never sleep. That's not unreasonable, though. I mean, it sounds good not being able to sleep, but after a few nights of staying up all night, when nobody else is around, it starts to just kind of get annoying. The only places that aren't closed are the ones that you feel like a tool for being in the middle of the night. People get mad if you're making too much noise, so you get all self-conscious. And the rising sun doesn't have that sense of optimism everybody pretends it does. Now, it's like a slow reminder that everyone in the world is better than you are. And then you get to watch your neighbor run by in his tracksuit covered in "I gave blood today" pins while you're still finishing off your beer. Nightlife isn't as awesome as it sounds when you're 18. So they reach the train station where the doctor will be arriving, but Mulder spots Preacher coming up behind him with a gun and shoots down Mulder. But it was all just a dream. No, it actually was this time. Preacher must have been using his Dream Vulcan mind probe shtick on Mulder, but set it on stun since the dream bullets didn't actually kill him. Luckily, security cameras spot a car that vanished at that time, so hey, we have a new lead. Come on, Krychek, who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Preacher's already set to make with a dream yourself to death on the doctor involving soldiers and a big pile of scalpels. And sounds like it's too late for that guy. Oh no, he's just wounded. Looks like the only cut he's got there was the one made by Preacher himself to the back of the neck. Then again, Mulder saving one person this episode at least is probably pretty important. It's kind of hard to justify your hero role if you can't save at least one person, even if it's only because the bad guy just left him tied to a pole for you to find. Preacher looks to be ready to kill himself, but Mulder steps in and asks to talk about what happened. A heart-to-heart over that safety hazard. Krychek interrupts, though. He'd been left to watch the doctor, but with backup and ambulances here, he rushes in, gun out, which gives Preacher the excuse to pull his own gun, So Krychek has to shoot him, and he didn't fall? Inconceivable! I mean, look at that. There's no railings. He's shot near the ledge, and there are jagged pipes down there, and he doesn't fall? I mean, that's like hitting somebody with a chair and not saying, have a seat. I mean, especially the whole pipe thing. I mean, a director isn't going to waste a perfectly good jagged pipe. That's what they're in the world of fiction for, after all, to impale people on them. There's like an electromagnetic attraction between them and the human torso. Well, thanks to this, Muldar can't use Preacher's testimony, and his and Scully's copies of the reports were both stolen, so it looks like another victory for the government conspiracy. Sleepless is a hard episode to label because it has two extremely important parts to the myth arc, the introduction of Krychek and the full reveal of Mulder's new inside man, X. At the end, Krychek is revealed to actually be working for the cigarette-smoking man, and it's him that suggests that even split up, Scully is a problem. The cigarette-smoking man implies that something bad is going to happen to her. But that'll be for later this summer. Anyway, these revelations aside, for the most part, Sleepless is an unremarkable story, and the myth arc elements aren't even integral to that story. I'm betting they were probably added on after the fact. I mean, Krychek could be any agent or cop, and X's report provided a name that was excluded deliberately from an official record, just so he adds something, really. And the report that stood in there for the kind of stuff that Scully did last month when she was talking about flatworms. But anyway, I don't think that's enough to make this a necessary part of the myth arc. So I'm going to list this as watchable. It has its moments, but mostly it's nothing really special.
I don't appreciate being ditched like someone's bad date.
Sorry if I hurt your feelings.